Hello everybody, today I have another video for you all. Hooray! This is part 4 of my 5-part 100, 200 sub special. And I know it's been a while since my last video again. I plan to get better about it for the rest of the year, but that's not what we're here to talk about. Now you might notice that there's something missing from the background. No, it is not Menasor, and no, it is also not Devastator. If you've been paying attention from the past few videos in my 200 sub special, I've had 2 characters in the background. And today I'm going to be talking about these 2 characters. Now, if you remember from my previous video, you'll know that I was talking about some of my original characters called the Mecha Guardians. And these 2 characters are important characters in my Mecha Guardians story. So the 2 characters are Peacebreaker and Teratron. So first I'll start with Teratron. And his full name is Teratron Hook, and he is the creator of the Mecha Guardians. If you remember from my previous video, I talked about my characters, the Mecha Guardians. Here's one of them. This is Unknown Warrior. He's the leader of the Mecha Guardians. And Teratron Hook was the one who created them. And he created them to protect his planet, because he is the king of Terabot Planet. And he built these special eye trophies here to basically power them, act as almost beacons of power to charge all the Mecha Guardians. And eventually he drove himself mad trying to make the entire army of Mecha Guardians. And he ended up blowing himself up along with a majority of his Mecha Guardian creations. That's just a simple recap, but if you want to hear a little more about the story and about the Mecha Guardians in particular, just go check out my previous video on my channel. It is a bit of a long story, but I feel like it is worth a little bit of a listen just to understand who this guy is just a little better. Anyways, getting into a more closer look of him, just showing off some of the details. As you can see, his main accessory is this trident type staff thing. Now, I'd like to call this the Electro Trident. As you can see, I put this little electric piece on the top, right up here. And his Electro Trident is basically capable of absorbing energy and electricity and being able to use it. Yeah. I have a bit more of a story, I just can't think of the entire story right now. Maybe I'll do a video talking about it a little more. His back is pretty basic, but you could see that there's this one little stud right here, which you could actually use to connect his Electro Trident to. Which looks pretty cool. I like to think he walks around more often like this than with it in his hand. Speaking of which, you might notice that his right hand is different than his left hand, which I'll explain why that is in a little while, but it's basically supposed to be a prosthetic hand, and as you can see, there's this little print here, and I'd like to think that this is almost like a control panel or some sort of monitor screen that's connected to the hand to kind of show how functional it is at all time. I think the most interesting part about him is his face, and as you see, he's got these thick eyebrows, these kind of spread apart orange eyes, and this kind of 4-clawed mouth, and I like to think these are like four claws that kind of click together to form a beak almost. When he gets like angry, they can like unhinge almost. Coming down to like his lower legs and stuff, his torso actually right here is kind of thin, because originally he was a little bulkier, but it didn't look very good because there was a lot of like rigid angles the way I use all the bricks. So I slimmed it down, but I don't really know how to fill in this area, the certain types of pieces I use to build it, and also keep it like smooth. Probably think of something eventually. Anyways, back to the legs. They're almost entirely symmetrical, unlike the hands. As you can see on the back, there are these little kind of jet things. I'd like to think that he's capable of flying. There's one on both sides. I used to have one on his back, but I actually removed it to be able to put his trident on, and also originally it stuck very far out off his back and it looked kind of weird. And I wanted him to be more organic looking, because if you remember from my previous video, I explained that the Terabots and the Mecha Guardians are 2 different things. and he is a Terabot. He's the king of Terabot planet. But again, if you want more story about that, go watch my previous video, because I have a lot of story, and there's too much to fit into this video. Now coming down here, as you can see on each leg, there are actually 3 little studs on each side. These are actually an homage to Five Nights at Freddy's. A character, Funtime Foxy, has these 3 little dots, and this is kind of just a reference to that. Kind of just a simple little homage, almost reference type thing that it means nothing, but I just thought I'd throw it in just to have that little fun little Easter egg. His legs and arms are built with this very similar type of contraption, where it's a snot brick, studs on all sides, 2 plates, and then another snot brick. It's the same on the arms. If you don't know what snot means, it means studs not on top, which basically, the studs are the little circular brick things right there. Those are called studs. And snot means studs not on top, which is when you build with studs on all sides, not on top. If you remember from earlier, I mentioned how Teratron ends up blowing himself to pieces. I also said that in my previous video. And so he does actually survive the explosion, but he is really worse for wear. So this is Lord Fist, also known as Teratron after the explosion. And basically the story is that after Teratron got blown up, his hand prosthetic piece, right here, all this, basically basically comes to life and gets possessed by his soul. And which is why it's only his right arm that exists. And yeah, as you can see, he's got this one singular eye with this thick eyebrow piece. This is a pretty cool piece, by the way. And he's got this staff type thing. I'd like to think this is actually a different type of staff from his trident, his electro trident. I just moved the camera down a little bit just so you can see it a little better. I won't go into too much detail about this version of Teratron, but something interesting that I noticed after I built both versions of them is that I accidentally made the arm joints on both of them the exact same. So if you really wanted to, you could have it, you can connect this arm to Teratron and have it like this. Which, if you remember, these are the exact same characters, so this will never really work in the real world. But I'd like to think that at some point, some sort of weird time traveling type thing happens, and then somehow this happens. And I like to call this Ultimate Teratron, because not only is it Teratron, but also the possessed arm piece as well. I'd like to think that the arm is still sentient while being connected to him, so he doesn't really have full control of this arm, but he'd still kind of control it a little bit. So I'll go into more detail on this guy in a future video, so if you want to see that, subscribe. And the final thing to say about Teratron is that he's the father of the Hook brothers. If you remember from my previous video and one of my older videos, I talk about the Hook brothers, and their names are Junky, Scrappy, and Trashy, and they are the sons of Teratron. And if you remember, I said that Teratron is the king of Terabot Planet, which would technically make these all the heirs of the throne after he dies. Now, I'd like to think that none of them like to consider themselves royalty, so they really don't talk about it much, so really no one knows that they're related to him. And if you remember from earlier, I said that he blows himself up and turns into the Lord Fist, so a lot of people kind of forget about him and who he is, and since the Hook brothers don't really talk about how they're royalty, a lot of people don't know that they're related to Teratron. Now, one thing you might notice about Teratron is his kind of puffy looking chest and how it looks like there's almost something inside. Now, you can actually open his chest. So first you just flip these out and down, and then you fold these up and out of the way. And you can also remove these for just better access inside. And you can see it reveals this tiny little gem. So this gem is called the Flare. And the flare is basically going to be explained as this kind of powerful crystal, and it's like the only one of its kind that exists. And it's basically strong enough to power a robot. And what ends up happening is that after Teratron blows himself up, eventually he ends up getting himself resurrected using the remains of Lord Fist and the little flare gem, which is what brings Teratron back to the present day so he can continue to fight and defeat Peacebreaker. I thought that was a pretty interesting story and way to bring him back after he gets blown up. Because this isn't all Teratron, this isn't actually him. This is just part of his arm, and the main body is just the hand. I'll go into a little more detail, and maybe I'll do a full timeline video talking about like the full story. Maybe I'll even do some actual videos like with these characters. Now time to move on to Peacebreaker. So big he can't even fit on camera. But before I talk about this version, I just want to show off what he used to look like. This is Peacebreaker, king of the brick planet. And this is what he used to look like before he turned into the more monstrous version that I showed off a few seconds ago. And as you can see, he's a lot smaller and more proportionally scaled with Teratron, and they're a lot more eye level with each other. And so he's got this kind of sleek black robotic body. And so the story for this is that Peacebreaker used to have a body, but kind of due to an incident or something, I'll talk about that in a second, he ends up losing most of his body, leaving him as just this brick separator type head. And he wasn't really capable of being, and he wasn't really capable of going anywhere. And Teratron, being close friend of Peacebreaker, offers him up this prototype Mechaguardian type robot body almost. And since it's a prototype, it's missing an arm, but he accepts it and uses it as his main body. And yeah, that's how he ended up with this body. So if you remember a couple seconds ago, I said that Peacebreaker was the king of Brick Planet. And now the story is that there are 5 planets. There's the Terabot planet, the Brick planet, the Hive planet, Trash planet, and the Shadow planet. And I'll explain more of those other 3 planets there, but the main 2 planets that I'm talking about today are Terabot planet and Brick planet. Now, the Terabot planet is the largest planet in the solar system of my story, and it's the largest planet in the solar system, and it's also responsible for managing the other planets and basically taking care of all of them, and is like the head of all the planets, basically the center of the solar system. And the Brick planet is the smallest planet and revolves on the furthest outer edge of all the planets, and is often forgotten about by all the other planets. And eventually what ends up happening is that the Brick planet ends up falling into ruins and gets mostly destroyed, being left like nothing but a few floating craters in space. And that's basically the entire story on how Peacebreaker ends up getting his body, his robotic body. He ends up, basically his planet gets destroyed and he doesn't really survive, and he ends up having to rebuild his body. Anyways, getting into a closer look with the character. As you can see on the top of his head, he's got this interesting little crown. I'll keep this off just for the rest of the showing of the character, and I'll put it on later. Now, one of the main things you might notice about this character right off the bat is his piece separator head. Now, this is kind of an idea that I got a while ago. Every time I would look at a piece separator, I would always look at it like this and think of this being a mouth and these being eyes. Now, a lot of times people either put it like this, say that these are the eyes and this is the mouth, or a lot of times Lego shows it like this, so you could even say that these are the eyes and this is like some sort of nose or something. But I would always look at a piece separator like this, and I would always see a face there. And now that I pointed it out to you, you could probably see it a little more now. That's kind of where I got the idea to make Peacebreaker's head a piece separator. I actually do have some variations of his head since I have quite a few piece separators. First one being this scarred battle damaged version. I'll show some of these off later. A blue variant. I'd like to think this is like a completely different character and not Peacebreaker. A black version, which I used a knockoff piece separator. And actually all these pieces are knockoff pieces if you look closely. They're not as like polished. And I also have to use putty to stick this one on, but I'll show that off later. Another knockoff one, and this one's weirdly shaped as you can see. And yeah, you could also tell by the shaping of the bricks. Yeah, normal tiles aren't rounded off like that. Here's what a normal tile looks like compared to them. And then finally, a angry, no longer scarred version, which this one was actually on the other one, and I'll show this one off later too. That's not all. We could go further because I have plenty of piece separators. So let's go wild. First we have the green one, then the knockoff black one, the knockoff orange one, which looks kind of creepy, this one with googly eyes, this one with glow-in-the-dark eyes, this reversed one with googly eyes, a blue one with twinkly eyes, this sideways mounted one, this one with slightly different eyebrows, this one with no eyebrows, this invisible one, this one with brick head eyes, which I thought would be cute but looks kind of creepy, whatever the heck this is supposed to be, this one that's just a minifigure head, this creepy one with teeth, whatever this is but blue, whatever this is but much bigger, this goofy looking cyclops one, a double-decker one, a triple-decker one, a quadruple-decker one, a quintuple-decker one, and finally this one that's piloted by a minifigure. If that doesn't scream excessive, I don't know what does. And yes, if you were truly wondering, these are all separate builds. Well, that was fun. Anyways, getting back into the character, one thing you might notice is that he's got all these little brown Harry Potter wands all over him. I like to think that these are like little sensors, and whenever these sense something or get touched, it sends it up this wire right here, and he could basically feel it, so you'd be able to feel something or someone around him, and like they're not just like poking he feels, but like they're like sensors around it. So this one covers like this entire area, and then this one covers like the entire front, and this covers like the entire upper leg, and then this one covers the entire lower leg. And then he's got this kind of staff-like thing that's kind of shaped like a hook. It's pretty simple, and you can take it out of his hand. And he's built mostly of Bionicle and some Technic. Yeah, it was a pretty fun build making him. This is actually, this piece right here, I'm pretty sure is from like a Darth Vader Bionicle. I don't remember, but it's from one of the Lego Star Wars Bionicle characters. And as you can see underneath, there's some more stuff. Nothing too much going on. And on the back, you can see this little piece here that connects the wire up to the back of his head, which is where the infamous piece separator sits. And right here, you can see his crown. As you can see, it's got this little gem in the middle and this little shiny bit. It just uses like the little axle connection on the top of the piece separator sit. It's not very sturdy and it just can fall off pretty easily because the piece separator is not designed to actually clutch onto it. It just sits on it. Now you might have noticed I didn't show off two of the piece separators earlier, being these two versions of the piece separator. The battle damaged one, and then the one with the kind of fake eye. Now, these actually have a lot of story behind them, so why don't I explain that right now? So, Peacebreaker and Teratron used to be partners. Since they were both kings of planets, they worked together a lot and often would hang out a lot, and they're very close friends. Although, after Peacebreaker got the suit from Teratron, his mind got a little warped. Maybe it was either the suit messing with him, or maybe even his own mind slowly getting more corrupt, now having a powerful suit. And Teratron eventually caught on to this and slowly tried to stop him. And Peacebreaker tried to recruit Teratron in order to take over the entire galaxy and enslave everyone in the solar system. And Teratron does not like this idea, so he tries to stop him, and Peacebreaker does not like this, so they end up getting into a terrible fight, and which is why Teratron loses his hand, and also why Peacebreaker loses an eye. In the heat of the battle, Peacebreaker ends up losing both legs, breaking one of his hands and losing an eye, and also getting his crown broken. But since this isn't his actual body, it's not too hard for him to piece himself back together, which results in this. This is Peacebreaker version 2. Now, he is a lot bigger and a lot more terrifying than the original version of Peacebreaker. And as you can see, just putting Teratron next to him, he dwarfs Teratron. Now, this is kind of something I wanted. Like, after Peacebreaker lost the fight, so since they're originally pals and they're about eye level, and then after Peacebreaker lost the battle, he wanted to be taller and more empowering than Teratron to almost imply that he is the king and not Teratron. And yeah, he gains a lot more color and a lot more detail now, and is way scarier and way more intimidating, and probably one of the most menacing characters I've ever built, and the coolest character I've ever built. Coming up to the face here to begin with, you could see that originally when Peacebreaker lost his eye, he ends up getting it replaced, and what he replaces it with is actually the gem from his crown, his original crown. And I thought that was a pretty cool detail. Like, he sees the gem on the ground and his eye is missing, so he kind of shoves it in the socket there. And then he just kind of continues to have that for the rest of the story. Coming down to the torso here, you can see that's a whole jumble of mechanical parts, which I feel like come together pretty well. When I first designed it, it was kind of just random, just Technic and Bionicle pieces kind of shoved in there, and it didn't really make much sense. But I feel like the way I did it now, it feels a lot more scrap and junk-like, almost like trying to build up a bulky body, but not very well, or like intentionally not very well is what I mean. As you can see, there's like a chain kind of holding it together, weird boomerang type thing, a crowbar, and then a handlebar, and then spout, and then like a wrench or a hook, an anchor. And I'd like to think that these aren't actually what those things are supposed to be, just like random chunks of metal and stuff just shoved in there. Sorry about that. And on the back you'd see his cape makes a return. I'd like to think that his cape slowly just decayed over time and just lost its kind of dark color and faded in the sunlight. As you can see, he gained a right arm now, and I kind of like to think that that's kind of like a highlight of it. Like, he's now got 2 arms now and can actually fight properly, and it's like this bright white kind of Technic build, and I like to think that it's got this special power to go up and then have like this kind of rapid punch thing with like this kind of graded edge, almost acting as like some sort of mallet or mace type thing at the end of his hand. And I think another cool thing about him is that his new staff that's been kind of fused back together after it's been broken, and also his hand that now holds it. We got this terrifying claw type hand, which I'm really proud that I got to look good. And I used these kind of Technic Bionicle claw pieces, which did not have like a normal clip or stud connection, so I actually had to improvise here, and I had to use this incredibly complicated design. Not incredibly complicated, but slightly more complicated than the rest of the build. And I feel like it turned out pretty good. As you can see on the bottom there, it's slightly rusted. I'd like to think that it's like an older hand and like not the entire thing is mint condition. Coming down to the legs, we could see the completely asymmetrical, but yet still perfectly even legs. Like, even though they're completely wonky and asymmetrical, they still hold him up and make him stand straight. Like, they don't make him stand wonky at all. I actually made sure to do multiple tests to make sure if they stood up properly, and they did. And actually, a matter of fact, this guy is so big and heavy that his legs actually kind of struggle to hold him up a little bit in the sunlight. Either that or this piece in particular is just a little weak and slightly broken, but I'm not sure. As you can see, I used some mixed-matched kind of Hero Factory pieces here to kind of complete the build. I'd like to think that he's slowly scavenging through old parts and stuff and kind of building up his body. Like, these are all different chunks from different robots and stuff like that. I was kind of inspired off of characters like Scrap Baby from Five Nights at Freddy's. As you can see from this video, I do have a lot of inspiration from the Five Nights at Freddy's games, and I actually didn't realize it until someone actually pointed out that a lot of my characters do seem very reminiscent of Five Nights at Freddy's. This character being one of those particular characters where it's kind of like a scrap pile kind of being rebuilt from other robots and stuff. And putting what I consider the battle damage version of Peacebreaker next to rebuilt Peacebreaker, you kind of see where a lot of the similarities come from, how the shoulders are very similar, and how the breakaway on the legs are very similar on the bottom, where like you still have one of these down there, but on the other side it's different. And you can see one of those sensor things still remains on the leg here, and I like to think that now that all those sensor things are broken off, he can no longer feel pain, which is just something cool. By the way, if you want to know what the two Peacebreakers look like side by side, here you go. And I feel like it is a good kind of side by side. I'd like to think that this version is what he looks like before, and while he's still kind of younger and more lively, and a lot of people don't think he's evil yet, but eventually he slowly turns evil and he builds his body the way he wants to look, to be more terrifying and more overpowering. Again, just putting him next to Teratron just to show the crazy size difference. And also, if you want even more size difference, here's Unknown Warrior just to show how tall he is. He's more than twice as tall as Unknown Warrior. And by the way, he's supposed to be the main antagonist villain of all my characters, so he has to fight him at some point. Although he is going to have the help of him. Also, just in case you wanted to see how big he was next to Junkie, there you go. Again, he's still incredibly tall. All my characters have like drastically different size proportions compared to each other. I think one of the coolest parts about him is the way that I got all the tubes and hoses on the back to look, and it's honestly one of my favorite details, how it really kind of pulls it together and feels a lot more mechanical and realistic like that. It kind of gets covered up when you look at it from the front and you don't really notice it very well, but when you look at it from the back, it really kind of shows. And also kind of flipping this back to see that there is a lot more detail on his back as well, and not just on his front. I do make sure to try and detail my characters all the way around and not just the front. By the way, if you want to know what he looked like with all those goofy other faces, here you go. Here he is with the Cyclops face. He is with the blue twinkly eye face. Here he is with the double-decker face. I just want to see this one with the crown too. Here he is with the creepy brickheads one. Here he is with the normal googly eyes one. And here he is with the reverse. And honestly, I think he's a lot more terrifying this way. Altogether, I think these two characters I've created kind of clash perfectly and just kind of fit very well together, and I feel like they do feel kind of like a very good dynamic duo. And I also appreciate how both of them eventually have an alternate kind of evil eviler recreation, reincarnation of themselves. So I hope you've enjoyed today's video, and if you did, please like and subscribe, and go check out my community tab because I post there occasionally as well. And for part 5, I might talk a little more about some of my original characters. I actually have a brick-related character that involves Peacebreaker a little bit. But yeah, until next time, bye-bye.